Welcome to Tell Me More, the all-steel podcast where design meets innovation and we explore the limitless potential of workspaces. In this exclusive series, we're peeling back the layers of workplace design. From the psychology of colors to the future of hybrid work, join us as we open doors to conversations with industry leaders, architects, and designers who redefine the modern workplace. This is Tell Me More, brought to you by Allsteel, because when it comes to designing the future, there's always more to discover.
Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us on Tell Me More podcast. I'm Andrea Gauss, Director of Client Solutions with Allsteel. And today I have with me my friend Brian. Brian, who are you?
Yes. Hi, Andrea. I am Brian Kaule. I am the Director of Product Design for H&I, and I am glad to be here.
All right. We're going to continue on in our conversation around the intentional office. And before we get there, let's talk a little bit about what we mean by the word intentional. So can you define a little bit about that? Set us up here.
Yeah, intentional, I think, is really connecting the idea of dedicated space with the activities that go on with those in that space, right? Really identifying how people are now changing and evolving how they work, and then how the spaces facilitate those changes.
Yep. So let's take a pause and let's reflect back on this journey that we're in. We're 4 years, 3.5 years into an experiment called sending everybody home and then bringing them partially back, much more dispersed than we've ever been. In second quarter of this year, we saw a 60% rise in office occupancy year over year from 2023. And in the last few weeks, we've had an increased number of CEOs saying to their employees, get back or else. So what do you think we've learned over this past couple of years of experiment, that regardless of whether we're forcing people into the office or they're choosing to do so, what do we need to continue to reflect on?
Yeah, this is a good one. I think, where we center intentionality is based on, I believe, self-awareness, right? Like people are becoming more self-aware, maybe self-aware in a sense of their needs on how they work, how that has changed, and how there is maybe more meaningful or more meaning and purpose in individual activities than there was before. It's not just about so much output, but it's more about focus on the outcomes and things that people are, whether it's themselves being more engaged, but also being more collaborative and just the pace of work. And, I think it's really that self-awareness that's bringing that to the forefront and kind of maybe rethinking the way we're setting up the office to really operate, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I love to watch human behavior and just as people interact, drivers of human behavior. And we've said before that a huge driver is whatever can relieve stress. And I'm gonna work towards, I'm gonna be engaged in areas that can reduce my stress. And number one driver to that is productivity. So we've talked before a little bit about how my decisions, if I get to decide where and which I'm going to work for a given period of time, I'm going to choose an area in which I can be productive, personally productive. And sometimes personal productive in the short term comes at a cost to longer term productivity across departments or across the organization. So what do you think around that tension between my desire to be personally productive and maybe the greater good of the organization, and where do they kind of come into tension a little bit?
Yeah, one of the things I think about is just in terms of, like you said, returning to work, right? And focus areas, right? We talk about what you need in terms of maybe before it was just, there wasn't a sort of a dedicated space for you to go and take a meeting and maybe do heads down work or deep thinking work. There was sort of a generalization about it. And there might be a little bit of tension because, that again, that identifying of the activity or that type of work wasn't there before. And so you're trying to get the organization to recognize that there's different modes, there's different needs, and those might come in tension in terms of how the office is set up, right? So that's where I kind of go back to, And an organizational commitment to dedicated space, I think, is really at the crux of intentional office, because you're really recognizing that space at a foundational level is where you start to really identify that there are different needs and different things happen, right? And then from there, we go into, how do you facilitate some of those things? And that's where the sort of furniture and kind of comes into it. So space plus furniture, you can think of, like, in my mind, I think of like the formula of intentional office in that way.
Yeah, I think that's really great to anchor back in on the focus element. And we've learned a lot. We've talked a lot about diversity within the workplace, and it's been a highlight of focus over the last couple of years. And you think about an individual who might be more of an introvert versus an extrovert, their ability to go into a setting where they can be self-reflective or get a moment, take a breath, take a pause, I think is vitally important. And we are still, even after all the things we've learned, we still want people to be immediately able to spitball on the spot and to be hyper collaborative on the spot, without understanding that we're all coming at this from a little bit different. And believe it or not, there's lots of really, really deep thinkers or really smart people who are deep thinkers, and they take a beat, they take a moment, and they need that personal time to reflect a little bit. So yes, agreed, anchoring in around focus. And I think it's also been the biggest complaint that we've seen as people have come back in is their inability to focus, because we're learning that maybe as humans, we acclimated to the environment in which we were put in because we were forced. But now that we're returning into it, we're questioning, is that really the best? Could we do better? Could it be more intentional? And we're starting to drive some differences there, I think, a little bit.
I think that's where the self-awareness piece kind of comes into, right? Like the inadequacies of the office, and what you learn from being at home. Like, you don't have to think about it, right? You have that heads down. It's just innate. It's there, and you're taking it all in, and then you're being put back in the office. You're like, it's not so, natural anymore. Like, I have to think about, like, is there space where I can go and do that, right? So that's not to say that doesn't, I think, preclude the benefits again of the office, right? And I think that's sort of some of the attention where here's what I need, and that becomes the focus. But then, do I take advantage of the benefits of being in the office at the same time? So if we can provide one and then take advantage of the other, I think that's maybe a really good formula.
I think that's a good segue to talk a little bit about collaboration. So to harken back to that point, that maybe me as an individual, I'm going to prioritize my personal work, my personal focus time, because it's going to get my stuff checked off of my list. But sometimes that comes at the cost of the collective, either mentorship of younger employees or newer employees. It comes at the cost and the benefit of socialization and interacting. It comes at the cost of collaborating, ideating collectively towards a better idea. So it can't always just be about me and what's on my list, because I'm a part of a society, a culture, and a community in which I need to show up and contribute. And I think that was my key learning when I came back into the office initially, was I may or may not need to be there, but this line of individuals at my desk who are asking for my input, my feedback, and FaceTime, that is proof of why I need to be there, and I think keeping that at the forefront. So collaboration, balancing, there's a lot that we've learned here over the course of time, and intentionality about collaboration. What's at the top of your list, Brian?
I don't know. We've talked about, for me, I go back to, being a product designer, you'd think it'd be innovation, right? But I do think, there's a bit of the socialization piece, coming at it from the human perspective. One of the things, I have a heart for that, because one of the things that I've realized, even working remote, but coming back in the office, is that relationships are key, right? And like having one-on-one FaceTime and getting together with people, there's so much nuance to that when you're in the office. And when you're in the office, that socialization piece can just happen ad hoc, right? And so much gets, whether it's sustainable teams, even innovation, the sharing of ideas, And at least even the engagement of the employee, and maybe even to say, dare I say, joy of work, when you're sharing ideas or ideas that you have that maybe you didn't get a chance to share in that socialization context, I think is really, I've said before, that's sort of the tissue, I think, the soft tissue that sort of binds all the different activities together, because it's not structured, but it's very powerful because it's at a human level. And I really feel, I feel like that one's one of the ones that's maybe underestimated, but really is a pillar for all the other ones to build off of.
Yeah, Gensler's latest workplace research says that roughly 9 to 11% of our time when we're in the workplace, physical workplace, is spent in socialization.
Mm.
And so you can see how we suffered when we're not able to do that, how relationships sour. And we also know that if you've got a work best friend, right, you're more than likely to stay at a company than to leave. If you've got a buddy who you can cooperate with, whine about your manager with, the good, the bad, the ugly, right? All the
Yeah.
things. And we are social beings at the
Mhm.
very innate human level. We're going to move towards things that make us less stressed, help us be productive, and then we're going to be social. Those are our
Mhm.
two kind of go-to things. And sometimes the socialization helps with the stress relief too, right?
For
I think
sure. Yeah.
so you mentioned two things that can come out or are corollary to socialization. You mentioned mentorship. You also talked about a little bit about innovation. Let's dive into the concept of mentorship. And I really like to start with the notion of much more of what we know we have caught versus been taught, right? This
Mm.
notion that you caught a lot of things from your parents. In the course of my history, I've caught a whole lot from a mentor, a manager, a colleague sitting in periphery to me than they've directly stood up and told me, right? And so mentorship not done within a setting of us just naturally being around each other, I think we miss a big piece of that formative element of
Mhm.
mentorship.
Yeah, so you're saying sort of the informal aspect of mentorship versus the structured or formal aspect of
Yeah.
mentorship. Certainly, I think, an organization that embraces the formal is really good. But to your point, and again, I think part of the intentionality of this is, right, if you're in office or you're adjacent to, leadership, or whether it's, bonding within certain groups that you're already part of, or bridging with other groups that you're not a part of, that's sort of that mentorship that can really help you expand your thinking and grow. And yeah, it's capital that invested wisely, I think, it pays off, right? It's really both personally, and it's a two-way thing too. It's for the mentor and mentee. I think it goes both ways, which is interesting about mentorship.
Yeah. We did some research, oh, it's been 6 or so months ago now, about generations. And one of the key things that came out in that generational research is that pairing someone right out of college with someone who's a little bit more advanced in their career,
Mm.
how much cross sharing happens. And then the person who's been around a little bit longer, when they are the expert and willing to share expertise with that younger, newer individual, then they feel more able to ask the question about the stuff that they don't understand, maybe that the digitally native 20-something-year-old does,
Yeah, yeah.
because it's this back and forth. They're depositing and they're receiving,
Yeah,
and it feels better to ask a question when you've been providing context and helping the individual out in a big way. Kind of
right.
neat. Yep. All right. So mentorship paralleled in more of a formal context, I think certainly has been important. We've seen that be important, but by and large, informal
Mm.
mentorship that stems out of that socialization tends to have longer term benefit than the more formal.
Yeah, it's
So
very
then
genuine that way too.
that's right. Someone who kind of speaks the same language as you
Hmm.
sometimes do. Okay, let's move on and talk a little bit then about innovation. Some of our favorites, I think,
Yep.
in the world that we're in. Whether you're talking entrepreneurship, innovation, thinking outside of the box, so much of it, when you hear entrepreneurial stories, they start in the bar or they start in the frat frat house, right? Or they started on the
Or the shop.
subway, or in the, all the things. It's like,
Yeah.
I started with my buddy. We just had this idea and it sparked this conversation and it turned into this thing.
Hmm.
And so again, that imperative of that fertile soil being
Hmm.
socialization, I think is true for innovation as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about that too. And I think about inspiring spaces. Again, I go back to the sort of foundation of allocation of space and then with the furniture, right? But like, I think inspiring spaces in terms of innovation, but then having the tools within that space to quickly prototype or build. And because there's a piece about innovation is like, right, like you think about innovation is about creating something new, right? Where, and again, in contrast, maybe the conversation we've talked about collaboration, right, is where it's about the sharing of ideas and building consensus and achieving a goal, versus innovation being more about like where's the originality and the sort of inventorship and testing and figuring something new, and there's the toiling of new ideas, right? And so what I think is key to that is one being, and again, a dedicated but inspiring space, but most certainly having the tools or the adjacency of tools in order to really like prove an idea out and get excited about something and run with it.
Yeah, I think to your point there too, the ability to be a little bit messy, to kind of
Hmm.
allow things to mature or to marinate, maybe would be a better way to say it, to take a pause, to come back to it. And so, how are we creating spaces that maybe have been a little bit perfect over the last couple of years because occupancy has been lower? As people come back to the office, how do we allow for innovation through the messy and
Hmm.
not be overly particular about perfection in the way something physically looks, and or as we've maybe changed the typology of spaces, to be willing to innovate on the fly, live in
Mm.
beta, so to speak, both of the physical space as well as how people are kind of the adjacencies of individuals, I think can help spur on innovation in the same sort of way.
Yeah, I really like what you said there too. Like I think a lot about agility. As the market moves faster, in order to like, how do you keep up with that, right? And collaboration, innovation are key factors of that because is like, how you have a range of diverse thinking and you crowdsource and you really bounce ideas and that's how you germinate things quicker and faster. But I really like what you're saying too about the idea of, maybe this space isn't what it used to be. It doesn't have to be this clean thing. Like we talk internally about living the work, and there's a lot to be said about that. Like when you want to innovate, you see what you've done around you, and let it, you almost like indirectly absorb what you've done, and then you go away, like you said, whether it's later that day and you're thinking about it in your brain, but the thing's still up there at work. And you come back to the next day, and you're like, I was thinking about differently about this, or
Yep.
so. It's interesting how that aspect plays a role into the overall process, right? You wouldn't think about that at first, but spaces that allow that to happen and be more natural in that sense, I think, is a key. Again, I think you're bringing up a key factor to innovation in that sense.
Yeah, agreed. So you alluded to this already, the distinction between innovation and collaboration, innovation being more free form, not a particular outcome at the forefront versus collaboration. You're asking for feedback, you're moving towards a particular deadline, et cetera. And I think a key area of the floor plan that we're seeing is under kind of hot debate, maybe debate's the wrong word, adaptation would be conference rooms. And as I've talked to the clients, client after client after client, when I ask them, what's your number one problem area on the floor plan? They say conference rooms. And it's
Hmm.
because we built a conference room for 8, 10, 12 plus people. And in reality, meetings, effective meetings are 3, 4, 5, 6 individuals. So we've
Hmm.
overbuilt the space. And then that pesky darn technology. So you're talking about diversity of ideas and thinkers and inputs. And so knowing that no matter where we go forward, virtual digital interaction is going to be a very important part of that. Within the realm of collaboration, we've been talking a lot about how we're going to continue to roll forward and bringing people in virtually, digitally to share in these collaborative settings. And we've done quite a bit of space around the topic of digital equity. Brian, you want to share a little bit there?
Yeah, yeah. So, what is digital equity, right? So we talk about it in terms of you and them. you being on the side of the camera on this side and them seeing you on the other side. And a lot of times, especially myself thinking about being remote, are you being heard? Are you being seen? It's a little bit differently on the digital side when well, whether you're in the room or you're not. And we're taking steps, whether it's with new tables or, the shapes of rooms, the designs of rooms and our products to enable people to have more equity, whether they are in the room and or on the other side of the camera, to ensure that collaboration is, at the best it can be, and people are cooperating, right? In terms of, I do want to collaborate, I do want to speak up because I know I'm being heard and seen, and I think that's a big thing. If you don't feel that, you're less off, you're less willing to collaborate, right? And that's the sort of point. So there's a huge value in that, and we're really focused on that being a linchpin, I think, to collaboration, because you said it's not just about people being in the office. There's a diverse teams globally, that are joining via digitally, and that's just a key aspect to enabling collaboration.
Yeah. So as we kind of round the corner then here to the last activity, right? We've hit them all. I think we've hit them all except for learning. Learning's the sixth one. And there's probably other activities that are outside of the six, but we kind of say these six activities are kind of garner 90% of what we do within a given week. So learning, I think, is a big topic that's kind of more up and coming. We see when CEOs start to list out what are they thinking about, what do they care about. Attraction, retention through the lens of upskilling or reskilling is towards the top of the list. In terms of brand new kind of executive level leadership, learning and development, vice president role or C-suite role, learning and development, we're starting to see that. Which really tipped. We've really moved from training to learning and development, and this notion that big things are changing in the knowledge worker space. If you want to get into the topic of AI, we probably won't do that right now, but what we like to say internally here is AI is not going to take your job, but an individual who's using AI will take your job, right? And so when you think about that, what can I do? What can I learn? And likely roughly 40 to 50% of knowledge worker jobs are going to significantly change over the next 5 to 10 years. How am I setting my employee up for success? And oftentimes those Gen Zers are coming in and saying, what's my roadmap for upskilling and reskilling? And I want to be a part of a community and a culture that's going to invest in my longer term growth. So lots going on in the learning space. Do you have any particular thoughts here, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, just coming at it from a product side, I totally, I think about, the adaptability of learning, right? Upskilling and reskilling is about an organization that is adaptable and agile. It's not about reinventing, it's about evolving. And similar to what you said about AI, I think, again, spaces in furniture that are equally adaptable, right? That sort of facilitate that organizational commitment to learning, as you said, up and down the spectrum of the ladder, is really important. And I think, it's interesting when you think about the investment there from an organization, but then also, like, again, coming at it from a product side, like the furniture is very symbiotic because it's supposed to be adaptable to do those things as well. So I like that sort of correlation between those two things. I feel like it's like the ideology meets the product design. But yeah, I see a lot of similarities there.
And then coming back to this notion of we have different learning styles. And certainly there's going to be an ongoing building out of digital learning platforms, things I can do personally. But I think we're also seeing a big trend towards hands-on learning, collaborative learning, coming collectively together into a space where we are creating bonds, asking the silly question of the peer who's learning it alongside of us, doing some sort of physical, hands-on, tactile approach to, again, getting information into our brains in different sorts of ways. We're experimenting internally around bringing groups that are hired within a chunk of time together into a cohort And so this cohort then becomes your initial friend group, your peers, you're learning together, you're working through new information together. It's much easier to ask the question of that individual. And then at the first big company-wide meeting, you already have that built-in friend group as well. So that's been an interesting to see that, to watch how that's evolving, and cross-pollination of ideas. And there's energy in that cohort because they have this bonded experience that they've gone through together, which I think is really kind of a beautiful thing, and kind of all ties back to that socialization element,
Right.
Which is super important. Set from the top. Okay, so we're learning a lot here. I'm excited. I had a colleague of mine super early on when we were talking about the hysteria of the pandemic, and she said, history, the word history comes from the word hysteria, and out of hysteria, you then get history. So we are continuing to watch this unfold in a really, I think, interesting way. But my hope is that even when we do continue to move forward into an office first type mindset, that we don't miss whatever lessons were intended for us in kind of this point in time as we move forward.
Agreed. I think, there's, the research will show you that, when there's things like this happen, right? Like you can either, hopefully you learn from it, right? And there's a lot of things, again, I go back to the sort of like self-awareness piece. I think maybe that was a key aspect of it, that when you walk away, it was painful for a lot of people. It was a trying time, right? But there's some things that we have really learned. And I think there's a silver lining. There's some good things that come out of it. And that, again, I think that's what points us back to the intentional office, is that there is an intention. We were maybe, if you want to, we were coming to work before, and now we're it's different. It's intentionally, coming to a workplace, in order to achieve our best selves, right? And I think that's fundamentally different. And again, I look at that maybe as a silver lining that comes out of the pandemic, and how we're kind of, taking the puzzle and reorganizing the pieces a little bit to help them make sense and make better connections, and see how we can, be better in the end.
I love how you're just talking about puzzle pieces and this notion that the individual pieces might not be all that different. The individual spaces are not necessarily all that different, but how we're putting them back together, maybe the size of them is a little bit different. The adjacencies, the connectivity is a little bit different. When we think about focus settings, this notion that maybe they need to be more acoustically sound. Maybe we do need to give a greater variety of focus spaces, not just a greater variety of collaborative settings, but a greater variety of focus settings as well. So I think it's interesting to think how this is going to continue to percolate and migrate on us a little bit here. And I know from my seat, I've seen a big uptick in private offices, which, when you think about focus, you think about mentorship, you think about visual persistence, maybe when it pertains to innovation. I think could all kind of be tied a little bit into that. So I think the impacts are going to be far reaching, and we're still living it. And I'm excited. I'm excited for office first mentality, and also just excited for this notion of physically being together. That makes me drive for sure.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us on the Tell Me More podcast, and we look forward to sharing more and talking with you more the next time.
And that brings us to the end of another fascinating episode of Tell Me More. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of design and innovation. If you're hungry for more insights and stories, make sure to subscribe to Tell Me More on your preferred podcast platform. As we sign off, remember that the conversation doesn't end here. Connect with us on social media at AllSteel and share your thoughts, questions, or even your favorite moments from the podcast. We love hearing from our engaged and curious audience. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll continue exploring the Design to Do More philosophy. Until then, thanks for listening.